Okay. So, Alastair, you're also the guest of honor, and to tell us a little bit about yourself, and also interested just in general in your journey combining finance and marketing and other functions and general business betterment, and how it all led to writing the book.
Well, thank you very much, Shahin, and I should say thank you for describing me as a guest of honor. That's not usually what people say when a CFO wanders into their office.
We want your approval for our budgets.
It all depends on the politics of the moment, you know.
Exactly. I mean, and it's lovely to be here, by the way, because you know, so many people that I've sort of interacted with in one way or another, and getting the opportunity to speak, as you said at the beginning, Shahin, as friends, it's very nice to be able to do that. So thank you for putting this together, and obviously the support from Cindy as well to make this happen. It's much appreciated. People often think of me as an accountant, and it's true, I am an accountant, but I actually started off as a lawyer. So I did a degree in law at university, and when I left university, at the time the economy in the UK wasn't that great, and there weren't really any jobs as a sort of aspiring lawyer. But by chance, the one module I did really well in my law degree was tax law. So top marks right the way through on tax law. So I thought, well, lawyers weren't hiring, but accountants were. And I thought, well, if I'm good at tax law, I'm probably going to be all right as an accountant. So I kind of made that switch. Ironically, I've never worked in tax in my professional practice. So I'm not a tax specialist, and I wouldn't pretend to be, but that was what kind of got me into it. And it was a fantastic puzzle, because basically you've got all these rules and regulations, and your job is to try and minimize the tax take at the other end of that. And you have to kind of balance off a range of different factors. And I found that, you know, it's like, you know, three-dimensional chess or something. It was an intellectually interesting thing to do, solving a puzzle to get the number at the bottom as small as you could possibly get it. So I enjoyed that, and I spent, I suppose I spent 10 or 15 years really as an accountant working up, you know, an organization to the point where I got a finance director role, which is what you call a CFO in the US. We call finance director over here. It's the same thing. The kind of #1 finance spot in the business, C-suite finance spot. And I was very fortunate to work for a company which believed strongly in giving people opportunities in personal development. They didn't think of it like that, and didn't even talk of it like that. In many ways, it was a very traditional business. But what they did do was they gave people opportunities to try things out and see if they liked them and see how good they were. And I spent about 10 or 11 years at this business, mostly in increasingly non-financial roles. So I've done business development type roles. I was CEO for this business, or for the division of this business. And then I've worked in other sectors. I've worked at 3 small ad agencies, for example, in the course of my career. So a lot of what I picked up by way of background in marketing comes from my time there. They were all specialists in direct mail, which the older people on this call will remember. Not sure anybody else does, but they were direct mail agencies. And I've also spent a bit of time working working at university as well, so I've really, you know, spanned quite a wide variety of different things, and currently I work as a freelance CFO for businesses which you don't need a full-time person in-house. They tend to be kind of smaller growing businesses, but they do need little bits of expertise dropping in at different times. Maybe when they're going through a significant change, maybe when they're, you know, having to negotiate with the bank, you know, that sort of thing, where they need that support and a greater level of expertise, and someone who can kind of talk to the bank in a way that the bank can understand what's going on, rather than they're trying to hack their way around unfamiliar territory. So that's what I do now, and it's great because again it means I'm working for a wide variety of organisations who do a range of different things. And I suppose the thing which I really enjoy, and I've been very fortunate in my choice of career, albeit it was largely accidental at the beginning, because finance is a role that you can move around from one sector to another fairly easily. Because as I always say, the debits are always on the left, the credits are always on the right. That's how finance works everywhere.
That's very true.
So that has given me a range of different perspectives, and has allowed me perhaps to bring a slightly different focus to finance. If I'd spent 40 years in the automotive sector or something, I'm not knocking that, but I would only know about the automotive sector. Whereas I've worked in probably a dozen different sectors over time, and I've worked in non-financial roles as well as financial roles. And I think that really does inform, that perspective really does inform the way you look. Even though now I'm looking at finance problems, I'm looking at it informed by the other experiences around that, and that's hopefully is what I bring to the party.
Excellent. And then somehow that ended up getting you to where you thought you wanted to write a book.
Well, indeed. And I've got this thing, and it's true. I have to say, of every profession. I'm not saying this against just accountants or anyone else, but professions like to have this kind of big mystique about, oh, you wouldn't understand what goes on in here. It's all extremely complicated. By the way, here's my bill for $1,000 an hour. It's that sort of thing. And of course, there are some things which are complicated. If you're trying to do a discounted cash flow calculation or something, well, probably you should get an expert to do that. But there are an amazing number of things you can do just by understanding kind of what's going on. So I was keen to kind of demystify it a bit. And the other key driver for me, and I know I've had conversations with all of you about this over time as well, is that often for finance, the focus is on how can I reduce cost? And my focus is always how can I increase value? And that's not always the same thing as how can I reduce cost. In fact, I would argue more often it's exactly the opposite thing, because the more you reduce your cost, also the more you take out the potential for being able to boost your revenue. And all things being equal, in most businesses, you have a bigger hit in the bottom line by boosting your revenue than by cutting your cost. But the focus of so many people and so many organizations is all about, can I take 5% off the salary bill? I would say stuff that, leave the salary bill where it is and add 5% on your revenue line. That's going to do a lot more for your profits. So to me, the focus is in entirely the wrong place. So having had a lot of conversations over the years, the impetus to answer your question directly, Shahin, was to say, look, there are ways that you can do some simple things which you can implement very quickly, and they're often about a mindset or a shift in perspective that allows you to boost your cash flow predominantly by looking at how you boost your revenue rather than how you cut the cost. I'm not saying cutting the cost isn't important. Clearly you don't want to be overpaying for things that, have a market value, but it's also, you shouldn't underestimate the contribution that some things, and marketing is a good example of that, as is training, for example, but you shouldn't underestimate the contribution that those intangibles can make, because the right investment in the right activity can pay for itself many times over, actually very easily.
So I'm catching up with your thought.
Yeah,
so I'm catching up with your thought process then, that the focus on growth of revenue totally aligns you with marketing, right? Is that how it? Okay, excellent. Okay.
Yeah, and also my experience working in these agencies many years ago, because it let me see what it was like. Because direct mail, as you'll know, it's a brutal business. When you had to put stamps on the envelopes and send them out in the post.
I've done them.
You had 50 grand on the line just in postage. Never mind anything else. And if you didn't make the revenue back, well, you weren't going to be around for very long to do that. And they were quite, you know, coming back to one of the points you made earlier, they were quite analytical about how they went about the process and how they did their testing, their analyses, and how they were tracking, I guess, what we would now call the customer journey. It was maybe, that's not a term that was used at the time, but, you know, how they would be able to for example, you know, have a campaign where they were maybe losing some money in the front end, but they were actually making it on the back end, and how they were able to articulate that across the life cycle of that client relationship in a way that allowed them to generate a positive cash return, which is what they were ultimately trying to do. So it's kind of all those things mingling in together. But I do have this thing that, you know, my job is about increasing value, not reducing cost. Occasionally it is about reducing cost, but mostly reducing cost also reduces value. And it's reaching that balance is the key thing for me.
Absolutely. I'm sure we've all seen companies that have reduced their cost all the way to going out of business. Because
Exactly.
And also because they don't know what cost is actually generating revenue and what cost is superfluous.
Yeah, well, and what people usually do in that situation, which we'll all have seen, is you look for the most tangible things, and you go, well, you know, if I'm going back to direct mail example, if I'm sending out a letter that costs me $1 and I get $5 back, well, I can see how I make money doing that, so I'm going to keep doing that. Whereas the investment I might have made in training, well, is that going to help? Is that, you know, where's the ROI? How do we know we're getting better? And they're the things that you go, well, we'll keep doing the mail and we'll forget the training, and that might not be a wise decision, you know.
So this is a good segue into marketing's role, because as I was just alluding to, my view is that it really is supposed to be the engine for growth and engine for profitability, right? Which are very much finance business metrics. So Doug, Mike, what is your view on how do you define marketing, I guess? I know that can be its own, 5-hour discussion, but what's your couple of few sentence definition of marketing and its role as it relates to business?
I'll give you a quick thumbnail on my end. By last year of teaching, I've really gotten challenged more with that, because with students, there's always this, how do you present it? So first time through, I presented it as the 4 Ps, which I think are really core to marketing. And what I saw were students going, huh? But because what the 4 Ps don't really deal with is the question you ask, which is the role. So I've ended up looking at marketers, the marketing with a small, I'll call it marketing with a small m. This is the everything that should happen around the market. Has these 3 kind of primary roles. And one is to understand the market, understand customers, understand competition, understand what's going on out there. And there's a lot of range of what that could be. It may be understanding distribution channels, there's all kinds of things, but marketing's role is to know that stuff. Then as a second role is it needs to bring what it knows to the company so the company can make money with it. And that's all the departments. Now, and I'm calling it small m because it's not always specifically people in the marketing department that do some of this, but it's nonetheless, the company has to have this role of people know the market, bring it to the company into all the roles. And then there are specific tasks that are generally seen as marketing's jobs, such as negotiating with distribution, setting up sales forces, and advertising and communications. So, out of the 4 Ps, the promotion and place issues. So I've kind of come around to really it's those 3 things. And I get frustrated because I think marketers very often forget or understate, or the rest of the world does, the value of somebody's got to know the market. So we don't start from knowing the market. What are we doing?
Right.
And I agree with what Doug said. Actually, you mentioned the 4 Ps, and I thought back to Jerome McCarthy, who came up with that little model, the first textbook that I used, and that I actually used in the classes that I gave. But I began over the years to view what I call big M marketing and little m marketing, along the lines of what Doug is saying. And big M marketing is what is classically taught as marketing. It's an entire company. Everything the company does, some way, shape, or form, either contributes to value it's delivering to its customers or is a cost that gets in the way of delivering that value. And I found that there's very few business people and business leaders that I've worked with who can look at the big approach. It doesn't mean that people with marketing on their business card run everything, but it's really a philosophy of a company, whether it's C.G. McCarthy or there's some other models Phil Kotler come up with, but that 360 degree. I find what most firms tend to look at, what I call small M marketing, which could also be M for marginalization, but we're marketing three types of people. I find typically, not exclusively, but typically look the marketing departments for. One is to figure out how big a market, what's the addressable size, where is it, what names do they have? Do they have smokestacks? Do they have cafeterias? How do we recognize them? Second part of marketing is, and I think most people define it as promotion, beating the drum, saying what's good about the product when there's not something good about it, coming up with believable lies to mask it. And the third part of marketing, and I've been in B2B marketing all of my life, and this is mildly jaded what I'm going to say, but almost seems like the third part of marketing is to play fall guy when sales does not meet its quota. And it is a very convenient, and there are many sales executives who would argue, if for no other purpose, we need at least some form of marketing to be able to point to when quota is coming up short. I know that's a bit facetious, but along the lines of what Doug said, I'm an advocate of the big M. I see most firms practicing the small M, although I will tell you, and I think I sent an email to, just about everybody on this call. When I was at Nvidia, Jensen Huang is the closest as a CEO, the closest I've seen to a CEO who actually organizes his firm and takes it to market thinking like a marketer. And we jokingly, when people would ask, who is the CMO? And, we would joke, it's the same guy who's the CEO. But there are people like him, and I think Steve Jobs, and there are others who have it, understand what their mission is, and actually, whether they're doing it consciously or not, utilize some principles of marketing. But outside of that one experience like that, I'm right in line with what Doug said.
Yeah. There's you mentioned B2B, Mike, and even in the B2C, there are lots of touches that happen to a sales cycle before you go through the whole funnel. And there's a comment in the chat room about when the sales cycles are long, and even when the sales cycles aren't long, you have to touch the customer several times before they decide to part with their money and get your product or service. And that also leads to the marketing mix. But how do you then attribute success to a particular marketing program when folks in other parts of the company, often in finance, want to do that sort of disintegration? They want to say, let me look at your entire marketing mix and tell me why each one is important and in what way it's important. And sometimes that's really hard to do, to unbake the marketing mix. And now this, of course, is a segue into a lot of other discussion that we have. So we don't have to do it all now, but any comment you want to add to that, Alastair or Mike or Doug?
I was thinking back to Alastair's direct mail discussion.
Yeah, exactly. Great point. Or advertising.
Direct response television. And I got into it baking spreadsheets for our clients, for our company's clients, trying to say, okay, if you spend this money, what happens? And it was, fortunately, we had some fairly trackable secondary results. So we knew that kind of for every one we'd sell on TV through the phones, people used the phones at the time. For every one we'd sell by phone, we'd get 4 to 5 sold at retail. So Rosemary, that gave us this nice, easy thing to say, well, look at all the profit you're getting from retail, and that all makes sense. But I thoroughly understand the question, because there are always these weird things about, there's a long tail on marketing efforts. Every marketing effort has a long tail, right? That period of time where you're getting a whole bunch of little tiny effects that make it profitable, but you can't entirely measure them. You can't entirely quantify them. So they're kind of, they end up being a little bit of a matter of trust. And it's tough. One of the concepts I came up with along the route was that I felt like we needed to talk more about profit horizon with projects, because the question is, when does the company need profit back? And ad agencies, the traditional ones, go out there expecting that a 10-year profit return is just hunky-dory. I've never worked with a client that was okay with a 10-year profit return. I've worked with small companies where tomorrow was the profit horizon. And I've worked with companies in the kind of 6-month range, the 1 year, and maybe 2 to 3 years. And there was kind of this thing, I found this balance between, we know that there's long-term effect. The question is, how does that interact with when you need profit back to survive? And that seems to be tough. I mean, that comes to a real rub of, when do you need to survive?
I want to add that all of that is true when you actually know your sales cycle and you have a sales process that works more often than not. Many of the startups that I work with, I would say every one of them is basically their first and most important challenge is to find that sales process that works more often than not. Because only then they can actually scale it. Now, some of them get lucky and they just, strike it immediately. Some of them spend a few years before they find it, and it becomes really painful. And then on top of that is the other comment that was just made is that what if it's a committee buy? What if you have to touch several people on the customer's organizations to get their approval? So now suddenly your marketing mix becomes significantly more complex. And that's a segue to your complexity comment, Doug. So comment on that. Mike, you were going to say something.
Yeah, the two comments when Alastair was talking about direct marketing, and then the word you came up with, attribution, which I think is, at least in B2B marketing on a large scale, is somewhat of the curse, because I don't think you can ever really do full, cause and effect attribution to Joe responded to an email and showed up at a webcast. And now we're doing $18 million a year with Joe's company. I know way back in early 1990s, when I was working with Sun in Canada, a firm we were dealing with we were doing some direct marketing, but they handled the direct marketing for Lexus, the introduction of Lexus automobile in the US and Canada in 89. And the owner of the company asked if I wanted to see how Lexus did its direct marketing. And that was my first exposure to what I thought at the time was enormously sophisticated marketing, but because it was gated, and each offer was gated to, depending on the response that they got to another offer, whether they would narrow down the type of car, whether they then follow up with a leasing offer and that. And I was just amazed when I saw it. And the amazing thing, which I recognized, was that they were dealing, as often with consumers, with one individual. It could be Shahin Khan. So you have a pretty good notion whether Shahin Khan is responding or not to your offers. The difficulty in B2B marketing, and when they come at, and I've done it enough times, like I think probably all of you, when you sit down with finance, show me, with the bouncing ball, show me from start to finish what you guys did to get this account. And there's a tendency to, as the example I gave, to want to show that Joe responded and showed up to a webinar, therefore, cause and effect, we must have something to do with it. I found over time what was needed, and I would tell finance, if you're looking for one-to-one attribution, I can save us all a meeting. I can't do it. I can make it up if you like, but I can't do it. What I can show is a web of activities, and a web of activities amongst a number of people and an increasing number of people around the company, and activities that increase in their level of commitment or involvement, or at least imply a level of commitment and involvement, and really show how this web of activity, whether it's getting traction, but there's no way that I or anybody in marketing can point to one individual, one event, one activity, and say that was the straw that broke the camel's back, or that was the defining moment. And I found it, and I used to frame up my presentations and metrics that way, knowing that, finance, if you wanted to show cause and effect demonstrably, you were going to lose. You had to show, as almost like with, how can I best describe it, as with quantum mechanics, you almost have to deal with it in the realm of probabilities of certain, nests or webs of activities handling. And that was much more plausible for them. And then you could be able to tease out, here are the activities that seem to have to pay off what we spent for them. Here are the activities that didn't have that degree of payoff what we spent, why we may want to get rid of these activities, or why that activity was necessary. You don't want to throw it at the door, how it's interconnected to the others, but we didn't perform that activity particularly well. So I think attribution at the end of the day, anyone in finance who sits down and wants a full-on explanation of attribution, especially in B2B at the individual level, it's a very, very difficult undertaking, I think, for a marketer to show credibly.
Alistair, can I jump in and ask you, Alistair, a question? What I'm kind of curious about, Alistair, is it seems like there's like a cultural challenge between the two departments. And I know among my students, the students who come from finance kind of have a specific set of assumptions or something, but I don't know, what do you see about that? I mean, how much of this is that, the finance teams sometimes build their own expectations for clarity? But I don't know. How do I put? I'm not sure I'm exactly.
Well, how do you view marketing to begin with, right? How does, with your CFO hat on, looking at marketing as a function and as a group and as a CMO, what is your perspective? And in the context of also what Doug was saying, culture, how you manage, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, let me say first of all that I would probably have a very different view than most CFOs would. And to be fair to most CFOs, if you've only ever worked in a CFO role and you're only ever kind of imbued with that sort of professional background and understanding, it's probably no great surprise that you end up, on that set of rails, because your mind's never been open to any other way of doing it. And so that's the challenge. But for a lot of CFOs, I guess one way or another, what they're saying is, what's the revenue line looking like? And if it's coming in on target and the marketing team's, coming in under budget, they're probably doing a good job. That's your kind of first order of decision making. Of course, the revenue line may not be doing that, and it may be not marketing's fault at all. But that's a kind of second order thought process. And I think there is something. And this is the way that we were all taught to think when we were taught how to be accountants. So I do understand the dynamic, but I think there are not many things which break down neatly into little boxes and processes. There are some things that do, and if you're working in a field of maybe science or engineering, obviously there are some things which absolutely do that. I mix 1 unit of this and 2 units of that, and I get some chemical answer. But when you involve people and you involve more subjective experiences, then that's progressively less and less true. And so what I suppose what I would say, and we've already mentioned the 4 Ps, so can I mention AIDA while I'm here as well? Because I like to give these, a good run out. But the way I've always looked at it is that from a finance perspective, I would expect, or if you think about, the sort of traditional marketing funnel, I would expect you to be more able to metricize and to processize what you're doing the further down that funnel you go, or the further along that AIDA model that you take it. Because if you're going from, say, desire to action, well, you ought to be very specific who you're cultivating that desire with, and you ought to know exactly whether or not they've bought. Maybe not today, maybe in 3 months' time or whatever. But that's one of those things that's very processable and metricizable. But if I'm trying to get people to be aware of my products or services, I'm by definition going out into the unknown, and I'm going to have to cast my bread on the water. And depending how ambitious I am and what my targets are and everything else, I'm going to have to cast a lot of bread in the water. I'm going to small amount. I'm going to experiment. I'm going to try different options. But in one way or another, I'm going to have to step out of the unknown, out of the known rather, into the unknown. And so when I'm talking to marketers, I often try and help me understand how that splits out for them. And in general, I find that having the conversation about the bottom end of the funnel is not the hard bit, because actually that's an area that marketing and finance can generally get together pretty well on. You've got your salesperson makes gets lands one sale in 4. They make 4 calls a day. They're going to land 1 sale a day. That sort of dynamic works statistically well enough for long enough over periods of time that everybody can agree on that. It's more the sort of top of the funnel stuff, or the kind of A of AIDA bit. I think that's where a lot of the problems come, because accountants like to think the world is a known, bounded, piece of work, and it just isn't. In the field of business development, it isn't. You're working in places that are not an environment you exclusively control. And you're not always going to get it right. And as Michael was saying, you're not always, or you're going to, directionally you're going to be doing the right thing, but maybe you didn't execute it as well as you could, or, who knows, all sorts of stuff can happen. So you have to allow for the fact that it's not always going to work. It can't always be absolutely targeted. Where I'm probably a little bit more pushing is, sometimes, well, I'm going to create awareness. That means anything I do can fit under that umbrella, because I'm making somebody somewhere aware of something. And I would say, well, I'm not, I'm not sure that necessarily follows through. So if you're, and again, B2B is a really good example of this, because more often in B2B, you have a much closer handle on exactly who your customers are or who they're likely to be. So, I used to work with a technology business, for example, who sold software that was used specifically by one department in what we call further education colleges in the UK. And there's about 200 of those up and down the country. So there are 200 colleges. Each of these colleges has one of these departments, because that's the way they're all set up. And that department is the only place inside that college who's going to buy and use that software. So we could really, really, closely say, well, that's our market. And so for us, the awareness process wasn't, that was a much easier thing to do, because we sponsored a conference once a year, which in that part of the market was the premier conference to go to. Everybody knew we existed. It cost us 10 grand or something to sponsor the conference. We all had a nice day out, and then we could get all the names and addresses, and we could follow up from there. We could make the sales, and we had, 80% of that market, and we just kept rinse and repeating that cycle. That worked really well. But I think if you're trying to do something that's completely, different to that, if this business was trying to, I don't know, have somebody stand with a sandwich board outside Harrods on the basis that people could walk past and they might be interested in buying our products, well, yes, they might, but that doesn't seem like a terribly great ROI on an activity like that. So it's the sort of awareness you're trying to generate, the sort of top of the funnel activity, I think is the interesting part of the conversation.
Rosemary.
Yeah, so Alastair, can I ask, what words would you rather hear than awareness, because I know that CFOs don't want to hear, we're building awareness, but we're building awareness in a specific area. Let's say we can get you on the first page of Google for your most important terms. I mean, that's awareness. Isn't that what we want?
Yeah, I agree. I think awareness is a really good thing. But the question in my mind is awareness with who? Because I could create awareness with you for my services, and if you're not going to buy them, that's awareness that I probably didn't need to make. So I think it's being more specific about, if I sold saddles for horses, and you were going to suggest that we sponsored or we did some activity at a horse show, I would say, well, yeah, that's the other people we want to be creating awareness with. They're very likely to be buying saddles. But if you said, well, we're just going to put a half-page advertisement in the New York Times because that's going to create awareness, I would say, well, yes, it will. How many people that buy the New York Times are going to buy saddles? The percentage is probably not that high. I'm sure some people do, but the percentage is not that high. Whereas if I'm going to a horse event, I'm very likely to have people there who want to buy saddles.
So I have two comments on this. One is that, to me, this is really not knowing the sales cycle. If you do have a sales cycle that's more predictable than not, then you know the parts of it that you want to scale and invest in. The other part is that what I observe all the time is that when everything is going well, then nobody has a problem with anything, because obviously all the right things must be happening. And then the moment things start not going well is when you really have to do the hard work of what was useful and what isn't useful. And that's where the difficulty shows up. And if you don't have a sales cycle yet, a sales process yet, then you kind of are just searching in the dark. It may or may not work. It becomes really, really difficult, right? Yeah. Mike, you were going to say?
No, I was agreeing with what you were outlining there, listening to what Alastair said about awareness. I think I don't think there's a tendency. I know there's a tendency, and I was involved in a lot over the years till I got wiser, but there's a lot of pressure put on marketing in B2B and B2C to, beat the drums and get, something out there, and enough pressure that it doesn't really lead to the question, that should be asked, which is Alastair's point. Are we getting the message in front of the right people, the people who with wallets who might want to buy our stuff? I know a classic case that Shahin and Cindy would know. I don't know who else lives here is familiar with the Valley, but I know when I first moved here in 95 along Highway 101, the billboards that would go up with messages about buying some version of Linux or selling some type of specialized chip. And it was pretty clear to me that those billboards were vanity billboards with an audience of one in mind, the CEO of the company who drove along Highway 101. And it was pretty clear that the vast majority of people had no idea what these messages were about. And therein is part of the issue. I will tell you, and I'm sure I'm not the only one on this call who's done it, but I found that since so much of marketing is hard to do or hard to measure and hard to justify in terms of proving, really answering the question, the only question I ever really cared about, was it effective? Which is the primary question I think we're trying to answer. I found one of the easier ways to be able to get backing to do marketing, and at least to attempt the experiment, was to first have to sell the CEO and the CEO's team. And if they were on board with the concept of what you're doing in a campaign or whatever, that was half the battle.
Well, let's talk about that, because even when a company is doing really well.
Shahin, can I jump in real quick with this? Because it's awareness. There's one thing before we leave awareness I want to observe, which is I think the AIDA model, which I teach it and I teach another model. But I think the AIDA model, I don't like it as much. And I think this may be exactly why, because the model I prefer to teach has awareness followed by understanding, followed by people doing research. And what I found is, in understanding means the customer fundamentally understands the reason to exist, right? So it's not, I mean, an awareness tends to imply, there's a restaurant called Bob's Big Boy, but it doesn't include, why would I care to go there, right? Any promise necessarily about that. And I've done some ad work. We had a product called the Drill Doctor Drill Bit Sharpener. I've worked with all the sexy products, drill bit sharpening. But what I discovered with that one is it wasn't one that people would retain in their mind until they understood why they should give a shit. Because people don't even know that drill bits could be sharpened. So what was most key for awareness was to get them to, oh God, I know why I should care. And so the near term awareness kind of has this idea, like, Rosemary noted the first page of Google kind of ideas, but has that achieved what you want? Because that first step of awareness may require a message that is retainable at some level. So,
very good point.
Mike was saying, which is absolutely, it's that. And also it's this, what do you need the message to do to get somebody into your funnel?
Oh, excellent point. Yeah.
Far thicker. I tell my students, I refuse to ever take awareness as a goal for an advertising campaign from them in my classes. So if they do that, they get no points, because because what they come out of marketing classes with is, well, why would you advertise? Awareness. What's that mean? Awareness. So anyway, sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to jump in.
Yeah.
It's more subtle,
Yeah.
Okay. We're definitely going to need
absolutely agree.
We're definitely going to need another session just on that, because I've got all sorts of questions on it. But I want to get back to the CMO, CFO stuff.
Yes.
And what I was going to say was that when a company is doing well, the observation is that the CFO hangs around for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
But CMOs who kind of hold the job for many, many years are pretty few. So, the joke is that CMOs and sometimes CIOs are like radioactive material with a half-life of like 9 months. So within 18 months, they're like gone. And then a new one comes in. So that happens even when the company is successful. So like, why is that? Right? So from like a CMO standpoint or a CFO standpoint or a CEO standpoint, why is that the case? Why is that job so hard to fill?
Which job, the CMO?
Yes.
Oh, I mean, from my point of view, I know it sounds mildly jaded. I said, one of my 3 reasons for role of marketing was to be the fall guy. But right. I think that when it gets to what we're talking about here, there are things that, having been on the sales side, there is no question when you're holding up an order and it has a dollar sign on it, everybody recognizes and can measure the value of that. And it's demonstrable, it's tangible, it's quantifiable. The companies have an obligation in the marketplace to do the books to shareholders and that. So you need people who are skilled at being able to count, being able to organize the books and represent the financial affairs of the company in a manner that is consistent with commonly accepted accounting standards, and the same goes to manufacturing, product design, and that. But I think the thing with marketing is that because marketing is so difficult to measure in a direct cause and effect way, it's much easier to blame marketing or to look in that direction. Just because, we've been believing you're like the whole discussion on awareness, like, I didn't come up with that idea for putting up that billboard. You did, you donkey. But there's another reason for it too. If you were doing a lifeboat exercise in a company and you had various functions, I mean, the first function, and you had to throw one out of the lifeboat, the first function I would throw out is marketing. Because you need product, you need engineering to do the product. whatever fish you're bringing into the boat, you need finance to be able to count the fish. You need someone to be doing the selling. But marketing, the way has a very confined, constrained, essentially promotion role in a company. There are very high expectations that it's somehow like Charlton Heston is there with the staff. The Red Sea opens up, leads pour through, and when it doesn't happen, hey, you had the wrong staff. You got to get out of the boat. I think it's just much easier for the reason that you're having this call. It is so difficult to show a causal relationship between marketing activities and marketing and conclusions for the company.
That fits interestingly with because I do in direct response television. We also brought numbers into TV, immediate numbers, response numbers, stuff like that. And one of the things I got really discouraged about is the minute there were numbers, there was nothing else. It was like weird. It's like, well, okay, we're going to go spend $100 million on this fuzzy campaign with Joe Flacco jumping out of an airplane, and da-da-da-da-da. Okay, well, we want to spend $1 million on this, and it's going to come up with this much, and here's how many responses we're going to get. Zing, in on the numbers. Well, I don't think that's worth it because of da-da-da, aren't you? And you're like, wait, it's doing all this other stuff too. But I think companies, Mike, because it really goes with exactly what you're saying, companies zero in on those tangibles so fast, and they struggle so much with having any way to articulate and kind of understand the intangibles, and they don't to make them part of discussion. So I spent all these years selling this 30 years of direct response television, and you come in and say, well, here's what you can expect in the actual, and then all you could do is live in that box. Whereas my general agency partners are out there just doing crappy stuff that and they would avoid measuring. I had a client once spending $1.5 million every Sunday on an inside cover of Parade magazine and a facing page, and they said, oh, it works great. I said, why? Well, the phone rings off the hook on Sunday. I'm like, yeah, well, it should at $1.5 million drop. How much is it costing you per customer? They said, oh, we don't know. It was horrible. The TV was 10 times more effective, but we never drove those surges that they loved. So, but I think it kind of goes back. I really agree with you, Michael. And the other thing I might offer is sometimes I think that CMO shopping has become search for the magic. We can't explain what it is we want. We can't articulate in advance or identify in advance what's going to work. So we'll hire somebody to see if the magic's there. If it's not there, we'll get rid of them and hire somebody else. I don't know if that fits too, but I think your fall guy stuff, Mike, just nails it completely.
Also, even you're saying there, even that email I sent back to Shahin 2-3 years ago, whatever it was, and I referred to a lot of people are looking in CMOs, you're looking for a shaman. It's like, the medicine man in
Yes.
North American Indian when it comes to, getting rain. And it's been proven. If you do a rain dance long enough,
It'll rain.
eventually you're going to get rain. And I think it goes to follow with, because I think inherently people recognize that marketing, CEOs, CFOs, it's a very complex set of interactions where you're trying to convey something practical and tangible to a buyer. You get that buyer, whether they're a consumer, whether they're in business, they have emotions that flood in and get involved in those interactions. But there's an expectation that there's some form of bordering on witchcraft or subtle fraud that they're looking for in a marketer to be able to pull off. The problem a lot of marketers, particularly the young ones, have the belief that if you give me enough money, I can make something happen. And I would tell a lot of young, if I gave you enough money, you will make something happen. You will make the exit path to the doorway for me come that much sooner. But to the point you raised, last comment I'll make, Doug, when awareness. This may sound terrible, but I've found that And I managed enough marketing people worldwide to observe. I was twice in meetings where I asked a large international staff, raise your hand, how many of you have degrees in marketing? And it was like out of 60 people, 2 hands went in the air. And I said, I'm hard pressed to think of a profession that you get to practice without having any qualifications, but marketing is one. And I also sat through a presentation. I won't use names. It was its son, Shahin, will be people you know, but I had to go and view a set of presentations from marketing leaders around the world, showing all of the great stuff that they had done. And it's supposed to be sharing best practices. And I concluded after sitting through a 2-hour presentation that they were just exchanging Markham ideas. There is nothing about investment, nothing about return. And I actually told them, and they weren't happy about this, but I said, the only numbers I saw in these 18 presentations were the slide numbers. And not another single number. And everyone, so anyway, I think there's, to the point you made, Doug, about words, I think there's a point, and it gets down into where marketing can be devalued very much. If one's not careful as a marketer, it turns into a fashion show of bright ideas, like the billboards on the 101. And eventually someone is going to ask for the payoff. Or to your point, Shahin, if something's not working, sales starts to decline, then people, we did that wonderful campaign, fill in the blank.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it not, how much did we spend on it? Then someone comes up with a number, everyone is aghast, hear the number, and then the marketer's half-life can be measured in minutes after that.
We aren't helped by comments like when Burger King became number 3 to Wendy's, it took a step down. I was reading something in Ad Week or Ad Age, and there was a guy that commented, well, that 10 years of really great advertising from CPB may not have moved the needle at retail, but it got everybody talking about Burger King. And I'm like,
Therefore what?
Well, and actually back to Mike, and I think, this goes with you, Alistair. I mean, we have a problem in marketing that it's an iceberg problem. We see the tip, and the tip is communication campaigns and the community and all these things we do that are obvious. But the core of what marketing needs to do is down here underneath the water. So your marketing guys come in, and I can fully understand what you're reading to his son, but they're like, well, I'll show the stuff that's easy to show. So here, look at my ad, or look at this, how do you make it interesting? Well, my guys worked with the product managers, and together we nailed out something here that understood that thing. And then eventually over here, a really interesting product came out. And finally, Alastair got a ton of money out of that. Which is that's the important thing that should be happening. It's just not sexy enough to present. And so we get these marketing presentations that are fluff.
But if the methodology to justify investment is ROI, and you don't have ROI because it doesn't exist, not because you don't have it, is because sometimes, in my view, the cost of understanding ROI is higher than the yield that it's going to give you, because instrumentation and data gathering and data management is not free.
Okay.
So as a marketing guy, if I've got a budget of, if I got a $5 million budget and I need to put 4 million of it into getting my data right, well, then I'm just, what am I getting data about? I don't have, so to me, building that engine that generates good quality data is a cost that gets in the way of the engine running.
But is there a chance that ROI theater carries the day in way too many companies instead of real ROI? And, again, this is the funny thing I found in my career, which is if you want to make a spreadsheet and have it be believed, the numbers have to be tiny in size, right? It's got to be packed with tons of little tiny, and I've seen it with clients where I'll say, okay, here's the spreadsheet with 25 really important numbers. Oh yeah, okay. Here's this mess that has no impact. Oh, great, let's look at this, and they'll go off to dig in. And it's like, some of me wants to say, do they really want ROI, or is that just convenient?
But it's I mean, I totally agreed, but also, and I want to pass it to Alastair here. If you come from a background, if you come from a discipline like finance, where you actually do have all the data, and it goes to your comment about cultural differences. So everything is in fact pretty precisely defined.
Yeah.
And you've got processes to manage it, and you've got buckets that you can put things. Even when you need a fudge factor, it's all formalized. You know where to put things, miscellaneous or goodwill or whatnot. And now you're dealing with a marketing function that doesn't even have the data to begin with, and you haven't funded them to even get the data properly. And now you kind of don't have the data. So now that's like, that's kind of untenable, isn't it? I mean, would you comment on that, Alastair?
Yeah, well, I completely agree. And I'd like to just wind back for a second, because I was delighted by something you said a moment ago, Shahin, which is around, the cost of monitoring is not zero. The cost of tracking is not zero. And one of the things I'm very focused on myself is what I call the, are you spending 50 quid to save a fiver, which is kind of British lingo. I'm sorry for that, but are you spending £50 to save £5? And that I see that everywhere. People have got this. And it's this kind of management theory thing. Everything has to be tracked and measured. And I would say, no, not everything needs to be tracked and measured. Is that Albert Einstein thing, isn't there? Not everything that can be measured matters. Not everything that matters can be measured. But sometimes the cost, because now you need a department that does the managing, and now you need a manager to manage the people in the managing department, and now you need somebody in the C-suite to manage the people that do all the managing of the people that manage the managers. And this whole thing just goes on and on and on. And the net result is none of that is putting the resources where they're required on the front line. None of that is having the effect it needs to have. And to your point, Doug, about ROI theatre, which, by the way, I'm going to use that. That's a brilliant expression.
You're welcome to. Yeah.
But one of my particular pet hates, just outside marketing, actually, is with HR, because they've got a very similar thing. I think for a similar reason. We work in intangible spaces, so we have to try and put some numbers to what we do so that people can appreciate the good work we do. And one of the things I come across a lot, I don't know if you guys find this as well, but is they track staff absence. Do you do that over there?
Yeah.
So, our staff absence rate was, 2.13% last year. It's always to at least two decimals. It's 2.13% last year. And it was 2.62% the year before. So HR are doing a good job. And I would say, no, there's probably 1,000 things that could affect your staff absence rate, not least of which is, do you pay people enough that they can afford to take time off work? It's nothing to do with how good you are in HR, or it might, a little bit of it might be, but there are so many other things that are going on there that the likelihood of actually the direct cause and effect between how good an HR department you are and what your absence stats look like, the correlation is probably as close to zero as makes no difference. And actually, I would rather you stopped insulting my intelligence by pretending that it was, because I fundamentally do not believe there's a causal relationship there. Yes, I mean, a really bad HR department can cheese everybody off. I get that. But it's this sense of, I need this ROI theater, this KPI theater, this metric theater. If I can produce a number, and your thing about lots of numbers in a spreadsheet is brilliant, Doug, it's absolutely brilliant. If I can turn up with something on a huge sheet of paper that's lots and lots of numbers, and maybe a chart, if I can get one of those in, that would be great. And everybody agrees, my goodness, look at all the good work these people are doing, because the staff absence rate has gone down. And
so we should totally do a session on tyranny of numbers. But as we get close to the time, why don't we switch to some best practices? What works? How do we bring finance, sales, marketing together so that we do the right thing for the right reasons? Kind of, what's in place when it all works well, right?
I'm just I'm just going to, but real quick off the top of my mind is I remember at Floating Point, when I was in the role of marketing guy dealing to get sales approved by, it was personal relationships, right? I got to know my cohort in finance. He got to know me. I got to respect that he wanted stuff to work. He just had a job he had to do. He respected that, yeah, I did need to push because otherwise we would always be back at square zero. But he seemed okay with, seemed to develop, so we looked respecting each other because we really had interaction. It seems like a lot of times finance, the departments end up so siloed, there just isn't that way to build the fundamental respect. I mean, that's what I love. I mean, Alastair, I mean, all the time we've been connected, I love that you get what, you know, what makes your job work out of what marketing should do. And, you know, I get that I really need finances to do things. And somebody has to be watching where that money comes from to make sure we're not doing something stupid. So, but I think there's that understanding just starts that, you know.
Alastair, how about you? When do you see it all work well, and why is that when it does?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Doug's point as well. I think mutual understanding goes a long way, and there are two groups of people who don't spend enough time together, in my view. And in fact, in larger organizations, they're not even necessarily in the same city or the same state, which makes it even harder. So it's something you've really got to work at. But I think the other thing for me is this is responsibility of finance, I have to say. It's not something I think marketers should be doing, although maybe they could help explain this. But I think there are some things where you can absolutely have that, you know, numbers tracking, metric based culture. And there are some things where even if you could, and that's a big question, but even if you could, the cost of doing it just means that you're taking resources away from the front line. And actually, you have to, at some level, take it on trust. Now, obviously, if you've got a $1 million marketing budget and you can say, well, look, you can track me in 10 grand of it, but the other 990K, you'll just have to trust me. I would say, I'm probably not going to do that. But if you said, look, here's 900K that we can nail down, you'll have to trust me another 100K. I'm probably going to, if our relationship's good, I'm probably going to do it. You know, and there's some point, there's some kind of crossover along the line where there's a level at which you'd be comfortable taking a punt and or being flying a little bit blind, and there's a level at which you'd want to nail it down. But I think the most fundamental conversation that marketing and finance can agree on is, where does that curve come? To your point about, you know, when do I need the cash payback? You know, when do I need to be able to get the money in the bank to be able to pay this week's wages? If it's not in by Wednesday, we're out of business, sort of thing. Okay, that's just defined our horizon here, so we'll operate around that. And I think that, for me, is the fundamental conversation that needs to happen. And if CFOs and CMOs can agree on that, I think actually a lot of the other things sort themselves out.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Mike, your views?
I found what worked for me in getting it done to the point that Alastair and Doug said, but I'll put a word on it for a process that I use in conjunction with others that wound up being quite successful, and it is used, but interlock. And interlock meaning this: I'd inevitably sit down with finance and sales and at least in the business I've been in, with the general manager, the VP of business unit, and had very simple conversations along the lines of, you know, what does success look like overall for all of us? And how are we going to calibrate and measure that success? And what do you need me representing marketing doing? And it would become quite transactional, where you get into things like, yeah, if you want me to sign up for this and achieve this level of effectiveness, this is how much it's going to cost. And it's much easier to have a discussion on, this is how much this element of marketing, this part of the mix, is going to cost. And you got to be able to prove it and defend it, that people buy in. And I don't want to use, you know, touchy-feely words like shared buy-in and but I found sitting down at the table when I did plans with finance and the sales organizations and typically the product groups there, and it might take 2 days, but you get that, as Alastair, that shared understanding, and you get kind of a contractual commitment on here's what everyone sitting down at the table is going to do. Here's kind of the buffer zone we can operate within. Here's the type of reporting, how I will measure. And I would get into those discussions with people. And even at the point where you'd start the discussion, I'm happy to put marketing at zero budget, because who in here is happy with spending zero? And it'd be surprising. I know people who just were not happy spending zero, and that's because their problem is a few times is they're happy to spend, but they want to see what they're getting in return. And it's much easier to, I think, negotiate on the pieces and add them up into, okay, here's a campaign or campaigns we will do. Here's the level of effectiveness that I believe I can deliver this part of the mix, but it's going to be within a range. It's like predicting where's the electron going to be. Well, all I know is it's going to be kind of in this area over here. And then when you hit your high points and your low points throughout the course of a year or some forecasting period, you're not having to do a Christians and Lions thing every time numbers are going south. But I found that was the most effective way to essentially have not only just the meetings of the mind, but what you're really arriving at was like a collective bargaining agreement on what you were all going to do, what was expected, and everyone would sign off. And then there just wasn't this notion of walking the gangplank every Monday that you showed up to work.
Yeah, exactly. So what I have seen work, like you guys said, mutual understanding and relationship, personal relationship, Doug, you mentioned, mutual trust and collaborative activity, Alastair, you mentioned, a lot of that you echoed, Mike, on getting the whole team together with sales and marketing. Along those lines, what I have seen is it's easier to do in a startup, and that's sort of where I have successfully done it, is to just explain what we're doing and why we think we're doing it. And also recognizing that some of it is a bet. We don't know if it's going to work, but it feels like a good bet. And, based on previous experience, it does. And for some things, we don't have any data. And for some things, we're going to get data and establish a baseline and work our way towards better things. And for some things, the data is just going to get stored and not touched because we can't afford to really do anything with it. But maybe someday we can, and the historical data might be interesting. That has worked really well when it's been more of a, let me just explain what we're trying to do. And if you have a better idea, let me know. But that's the way we're trying to approach it.
Yeah, thinking about the articles we see and the like the discussions on Twitter and places like that, it seems so hard for marketers to relax to that point, to end up having that confidence. So many of the discussions seem to be like, I've got to prove to you this is the best way to ever do anything. Instead, right. Hey, we discovered this. It's pretty cool. Come talk to me.
Right.
It's just the whole environment is filled with this desperation almost. But what you're describing, you're absolutely right. And just sometimes don't see enough of it.
Right. And of course, startups are so heavily engineering focused because that's like 90% of the company. Mm-hmm. So they do think a little bit more analytically. They do think more like an engineer does. So when you put in front of them something that feels logical, it really seems to work very well. It's much harder, I must say, working with companies where the CEO is the CMO, because then really what they want is someone who's going to get it done rather than somebody who's going to tell them how it might get done. More often than not, they're looking to outsource activity rather than, consult and how to do it. That's not always, but that's what I've seen. Doug, does that ring true?
Oh, yeah, absolutely does. And I think, I don't know. I wrote a blog post about marketing caricatures just because I think sometimes the world sees the marketing department as a set of caricatures, right? We've got the CMO as TED Talk, right? That's one caricature. You've got CEO as engineer. You've got, or the CMO as engineer. You've got the CMO as artist and shaman. You know, I think Mike's discussion of shaman was absolutely right on. And that companies, and I wrote it in a blog post for startups because I think startups tend to do that kind of envisioning. As brilliant as I think the show is, maybe too many of them watch Silicon Valley and decided to take their archetypes from Silicon Valley.
Right, right.
You know.
Good. So we're at the bottom of the hour, I think, if that's what that means. So thank you. We definitely need to do a marketing metrics thing. The tyranny of numbers and just like how do you manage it or not. I think that would be a great thing. So if you guys are game, we'll set that up for next time.
Yeah.
But thank you. I thought it was a good conversation.
I got my marketing ruler right here.
Is that
Hey, you got one too.
Well,
standard issue, right?
I have a marketing tape measure. So
Oh, there you go.
I'm not sure, you know.
Okay, so Alastair, we're going to show up with our metrics all in place.
Excellent. Just make sure there's lots of them and they're really, really small.
I mean, a lot of years before that finally sunk in, I went, wait a minute.
Perfect. Well, excellent. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Right.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care. Until next time.
Okay. Thank you.